Thank you all for joining KSU's Franchise Management Speaker Series, Management 4124. Guest speaker series includes CEOs, private equity firms, leaders, bankers, entrepreneurs, and advisors like we have today. We're in a classroom on the KSU campus where the cameras will only be facing front and at the top of the ceiling due to student privacy requirements, so it may seem I'm looking down it all by myself. My name is Jordan Krolick, professor of franchise management. My non-professional life is as an independent equity sponsor acquiring businesses, consultant and senior leader with companies such as McDonald's, Arby's, Home Depot, and more. So today we're excited to have David Ulrich. David brings more than 15 years of human resources related experiences and 20 years of general management and strategy experience to his client work. After many years working for many years in the search business, he recently launched his own agency, David Ulrich Associates. It has led various national and international searches at the C-level and others for all disciplines within the restaurant, hospitality, franchising, and real estate industry. David gives an incredibly unique perspective on recruiting, franchising, and employee success. We're lucky to have David. So thank you, David. Welcome.
Thank you, Jordan. Glad to be here. Appreciate it.
So normally we start these just really kind of would love to know a little bit more about your personal background and how this all got started.
Absolutely. Well, I started in Western Massachusetts in a small town called Greenfield, Massachusetts, which is about 40 minutes north of Springfield near Amherst, Amherst College, University of Massachusetts, where I attended and grew up there through college, and then ventured into the world of selling copiers and at the time copiers and fax machines prior to them becoming digitized, or actually around the time they became digitized. Worked my way up from commercial sales to major accounts, national accounts, and then was recruited by Pitney Bowes to become a national account manager based out of Boston, covering both Boston and Rhode Island for national accounts in the in that part of the country. Was there about a year and a half before being recruited to a company called Gartner Group. Gartner is the largest and most influential research and advisory services company in the world that focuses on the IT world, and they have a unique position of being both the between the vendor of technologies such as Microsoft, etc., Apple, so on, and the users of technologies such as Bank of America, Exxon, any major corporation in the world. And at the time, when I was in Boston and when I moved to Boston, it was a very interesting time because you had the East Coast, West Coast. Silicon Valley was the West Coast and Boston was the East Coast, with a lot of influential healthcare, technology, a lot of growing companies on both sides. And it was an exciting world at the time because it was really the first iteration of technology as it proliferated throughout the business world. Then, like many of us at Gartner, decided that we had the opportunity of chasing our dreams with stock options and joining a company that could possibly bring us some material wealth. Unfortunately, the company that I chose as the VP of CRM and business intelligence sales went bankrupt when the dot-com bomb happened in April of 2002. I then moved down to Tampa, Florida, felt that it was an easier and better place to live than cold New England, and had been there up until from 2003 through this past summer. At the time when I was in Tampa, I then joined Merrill Lynch. I was there for about 2 years before being recruited into the recruiting world, which eventually became my business partner and major friend and mentor in the search business. And I was with that organization up through 2018. Went to a large agency in 2019, see how the sausage was made by a larger agency, and see if there was anything that was special that I hadn't learned or hadn't been educated on in the search business. At the end of the year in 2019, the grass wasn't greener on the other side. And there's a bit more family involved dynamic wise than what I originally had thought. I then went on my own, unbeknownst to me, in December of 2019, with 3 months before COVID shut down the world. Fortunately for me, in the search business, in doing what I've done, like a doctor, like a lawyer, like an accountant, it is a highly professionalized and highly personalized profession. That it's one of the few professions that you don't go to school to learn about. It is very much something that you fall into, because I don't know of any college program that's designed to learn the search business and also go into it as a profession of choice. So it's rather interesting. But anyway, I went on my own, and 2020, in spite of COVID, was my second best year billing wise. I realized that much of the corporate world shut down. I pivoted and moved to what I refer to as the multi-unit franchisee in the restaurant and hospitality field and the small mid-market private equity companies. It has served me extremely well, because many of the large corporations in the search world don't really focus on that segment. And it is a niche that is highly unique and highly profitable, but more importantly, it's very much a relationship business, and that's what I love most about what I do.
That's awesome. So, I'm sitting with a class of seniors. I'm going to actually ask the first question. Give us an overview of what a recruiter is, how do they work, who uses them?
Great question. So they're recruiters generally out of college or starting early on into the discipline or the field, learns the art of picking up the phone or contacting people via LinkedIn or any other social platform, now Facebook, Instagram, maybe even TikTok. But it is very much on a professional basis, because what you're representing is generally a very good job. And in the world of recruiting, there are two types of searches. There are retained searches, of which I primarily conduct, and then contingency searches. Contingency searches, by the word itself, are contingent upon the placement of an individual. The challenge with that is that if you have multiple firms working on contingency, it can become convoluted, and agencies aren't working on behalf of their clients. It's really a game of throwing resumes against the wall and hoping it sticks. So it's a lot more messy. Certainly, I have worked in that world to establish myself and establish what I refer to as more of the retained search from that perspective, which is a much more relevant, working on the behalf of the client to really understand what they're looking for and really present the best candidates, and then provide a 1 or 2 year guarantee for that candidate to stay within the organization.
So if I'm a student, I'm sorry.
Hopefully I didn't go too far off in a tangent explaining the differences.
No, it was perfect. But if I'm a student and I say, hey, I need a recruiter to help me find a job, I probably wouldn't come to you though.
Well, yeah, not really. So in the retained world, primarily, companies are hiring us to work on their behalf to find people that have been in the field or discipline for at least 5 to 7 years and have a senior level amount of experience, whatever discipline. It could be operations, it could be IT, it could be development, it could be HR, marketing, finance, etc. But they primarily are hiring a firm like ours to represent them and do it in a retained manner. So someone out of college probably is not the type of firm that most retained firms are going to work with. That's where a contingency firm would be working at a lower level, an associate level, or an analyst level, are two common areas for many agencies to work with individuals out of school. Another route is joining the consultancies, the Accentures, the Bains, some of the unique Alex partners, Ernst & Young, or organizations like that, to get some experience, because in the end, that's what you're trying to do, to build your experience so that you can basically become something of value to a potential employer who's going to pay you.
So I'm gonna, we're gonna get into a deep dive into the franchise space. I'm dying to hear your thoughts. Deep dive into, what it's like, what makes a successful employee a good candidate for you. But I want to stay on this line just for a couple more minutes because of the audience. So when I'm not getting, in my email, I get a number of requests from some small country that if I send them $2,000, they're going to send me $12 million currency.
I've seen those too.
I've done that 6 or 7 times, and I'm still waiting for my 12 million. But I know it's coming. For sure. When I'm not getting those, though, I'm getting notes from job boards or quote what people who are calling them recruiters, that if I sign up for a monthly fee, they're going to find me a job. What is that similar to what you do, or is that? Why don't you share how that may be a little bit different, and what your thoughts are on those types of things, and whether, if I'm a new graduate or a soon-to-be graduate in this economy, which is on the crux of change, should I be using those things or no?
Well, so the short answer is you probably want to be highly suspect of that, because you are going to be paying them to help you promote yourself within their database of contacts. Ultimately, that's what you are signing up for. Now, the biggest challenge, regardless of the level, even a CEO has a very difficult time to a certain extent, unless they are, unless they are changing jobs every 3 to 5 years and have a real professional edge about them for interviewing because of what they do with the board, etc. But ultimately, they sometimes need someone to help them find a job, because in the end, there's only so many people and only so many jobs available, especially as you get higher up into an organization. It's like a pyramid. There's only one CEO, right? There's only one CFO, and so on. Where there's many on the lower levels. But to answer your question, that is oftentimes called marketing or executive marketing, where an agency will represent an individual for a small fee, an introductory fee, and what they do is, once that person lands a job, they will then pay a percentage to that agency that found them the job.
As a new graduate, probably not the best use of my limited capital.
No. So, as a new graduate, I would highly, again, the nice thing about many graduates now is that social media and the lack of being afraid to reach out to people socially is probably not as hard as other generations prior. And so it's all about networking. It's all about meeting people, finding people who know people. In the end, it's that old adage of who you know never really it doesn't get old. It's endless for the vast majority of what happens in this world.
So you're going to ask questions 3 different ways. One is by me. One is if I see hands in the audience of the students. And third, the students provided me questions that they wanted to ask, and I will call on them. And the first one I'm going to actually call on is Brianna Watley. Well, Brianna. See,
Hi, Brianna.
Brianna asked a couple questions that I thought were relevant right here.
Oh, great.
Do we ask both?
Well, one or both, whatever you think.
Okay.
I think I like them both.
My first question was, what was your relation to the franchise world before becoming a recruiter, if any?
Good question. So, what's interesting, when I first got into the business in 2006, and I was probably in my late 30s, the franchising world, for the most part, from the late 60s, early 70s, had evolved where much of the restaurant industry was what I refer to as the 800-pound gorilla in the franchising world. Fast forwarding that to today, in the last 10 years, the proliferation of franchising into other industries and businesses and business models has grown enormously. So healthcare, home healthcare, business services, logistic companies, manufacturing companies are some of them franchised. I can't think of one to give you an example, but I've heard that as well. But it's amazing. So it's gone well beyond what you would think are franchising services and franchising companies that originally evolved around services.
And let's pass this over to Hayden.
Thank you, Brianna.
Who I really like your first question.
I said, did you ever consider another path inside the world of franchising, such as a franchise broker?
Before you answer that, Hayden Miller, and we will always market yourself.
Yes. My name's Hayden, Hayden Miller, sorry. And then question is, did you ever consider another path? You know, franchise broker is the first that comes to mind.
Well, so the franchise brokers are also can be somewhat known as investment bankers. And investment bankers generally are more associated with selling businesses and represent businesses to sell. So like a realtor selling your house, an investment banker is selling your business to finding someone to buy your business for whatever multiple or for whatever it is for that transaction. A business broker or a franchise business broker, in the same way, is selling a franchise business. The difference is that there are nuances and information about franchising that needs to be identified, understood, but it's a similar process, which is representing a company, Jack in the Box, Del Taco are examples or whatever, and finding buyers of those franchises out in the marketplace. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Great.
So you started your own firm now over the last couple of years.
Yes.
Walk us through that, because we have a lot of potential entrepreneurs here.
Yes.
You know, what were the worries? What were the concerns? What were the opportunities? What have been the benefits? Maybe some of the detractions. Share with us about that decision, especially coming from your previous employer, which was, as you said, a much larger organization, much more capital behind them.
Sure. Well, I mean, and really even prior to that, being in the wealth management world with Merrill Lynch, what Merrill Lynch taught me is the importance of building relationships with people, and what I like to say is the fiduciary responsibility of managing people's career. The nice thing about what I do, and I had mentioned earlier, I've always been in sales or business development, whether it was in copiers, eventually technology and services and things of that nature. Recruiting is very much a sales-based business, where whether you're recruiting for candidates, which means you're reaching out to someone, introducing yourself, hopefully with credibility, and introducing to them a job because generally we are, as a retained search firm, finding individuals that are kicking ass and taking names for companies in their current position and trying to entice them to consider other options. So you are possibly upsetting someone's career, and that's where that fiduciary responsibility of managing someone's career is very important to me personally. And I go to great lengths to be very transparent, as when I'm representing a company, I want to give people the from A to Z, the good, bad, and the ugly about the opportunity, so that they don't call me 3 or 6 months into their new job saying, "Oh my God, get me out of here. This is not what I thought. It's a dumpster fire, and the politics are not what I originally signed up for."
That makes a lot of sense. So we're going to kind of shift a little bit. It's funny, I got a lot of questions on people and what makes people successful, and we're going to hit those in a little bit. But first of all, this is a franchising class. I'd love to get your thoughts on what is unique, interesting, challenging, worrisome about the franchise industry. How do you see the industry today?
So the industry today, in my opinion, has really evolved and has become so much more professionalized than it was in the early days. Subway is a great example of is the largest franchised company in the world, with, I don't know, 29 or whatever locations franchised. And they were originally started and backed by doctors, hence the Doctors Associates. And when they would, at that time in the mid 60s, it was a sandwich shop, very, very basic, very easy, but it was also brother and sister, family, friends, family members, and things like that. So early on, it was very simplistic. It was a lot of sweat equity for many initial investors. It was a job replacement or an opportunity to create wealth rather than working for the man and working up the corporate ladder in that way. Today, I would say I'm going to focus primarily on the restaurant hospitality industry and even generally franchising, as I mentioned before. In 2014, 15, and 16, in the restaurant world, many companies like Yum Brands, McDonald's, Wendy's, the usual suspects, what I would refer to as the legacy companies, they began to move into going from a 50-50 corporate mix to a franchise mix to really selling off corporate businesses and becoming 70-30, 80-20, 90-10, even almost 95, almost 100%. Dunkin' Brands is one of the few that are 100%, generally right out of the get-go. But what happened at that time is that private equity also, prior to that point, generally bought companies. Then the word got out, I don't know why and how, but the mindset within the private equity world was, hey, we can buy 15, 20, 40 companies, and the cash flow is as attractive and can be financially engineered in the same way as buying a company outright. And so many of the large multi-unit franchisees didn't exist 10 and 15 years ago. Flynn Restaurant Group is probably a $3 or $4 billion and is the largest multi-unit franchisee in the restaurant hospitality field.
And so, please keep going.
So today, since 2014 and 15 and 16, the business and the franchising business has gone away from the family dynamics of brother and sister and family members being multi-unit franchisees to being more professionalized, which I think has its own unique challenges, but also makes the business better because it requires now companies who are franchising have to invest more in their businesses to continue to grow than they ever did before. So that is a greater opportunity. And for many executives, a great alternative than having to go up and slog through the corporate bureaucracy of growth and promotions and things like that.
So similar to an executive joining a company and wanting to understand the culture and so on and so forth, a lot of students who are thinking about becoming franchisees, what do you see as what they should be looking at?
Well, first of all, to be a franchisee, you have to have several things. One, you have to have a liquid net worth that is acceptable, and that ranges from concept to concept, company to company, etc. But having liquid net worth means the access to cash, having the money and the resources behind you, because to be a franchisee, a franchisor is relying on you to grow the business and to through your development agreements, based on whatever amount development agreements that you sign up for, they're going to be managing that to make sure that you hit that, because they're relying on you to do what you say you're going to do. And that is a whole host of different challenges, but that's ultimately the point of why a franchisor is becoming or is very selective on who is their franchisee. So they're not going to just let anybody into the game.
So you deal with a lot of franchisors and probably some larger mid-sized franchisees.
Yes.
What makes for a good one? You see so many.
Well, that's a great point. So what I've learned and why I transitioned or pivoted when COVID hit from focusing primarily where I came from in the corporate world to the multi-unit franchisee and small mid-market was because the evolution, as I mentioned, about the business overall has become more professionalized. But companies now have to rely more and more to hire individuals to continue to grow the business. And that becomes an important part of the future and the multiple, because some companies are publicly traded, and they're highly dependent upon that in that growth.
And so what's different or unique about recruiting in the franchise space versus the copier space or some of your previous lines?
So what's unique and what I find rather enjoyable is that many franchisees are entrepreneurial minded, meaning that they have to use their own money to create the wealth and to build the business. And it requires a lot of fortitude, a lot of intelligence, sometimes sleepless nights, but the return can be very substantial. And really someone who has the ability to build a team around you, because you cannot, as an individual, be a successful franchisor and do it all yourself. I will say, from my perspective, I've started my own agency, and I personally see myself providing myself and my family a good income, but I'm not at a point of really being what I would refer to as a sustainable business. And what I define as a sustainable business is when you have money coming in or you have business conducting itself, whether you're at work or not. And that, as a business owner, is very important. So you've got to identify people that you can trust to complement what you bring to the table, because especially now, you just can't rely on your family to be the trusted members of your internal circle to be successful. So recruiting is very important in identifying ultimately the culture fit, because in the end, when you go through most individuals, they're going to have 90 to 95% of similar experiences, knowledge, understanding. That 5% that you can't just go through, like, you know, with AI. And let me just go here, Jordan. And I've often, when I first got into the business, I often would say to myself, am I in the buggy whip business? In other words, the recruiting world, is it a business that eventually will go away just because of technology and other things? And AI in the last 5 years has become very, very good at identifying things. However, until there's an algorithm that AI has developed to identify culture fit within an organization, and that's where the science and the art of what I do and what we do as a profession is different than building in a laboratory all these assumptions and then having the AI bots go out there and identify people. First and foremost, that's recruiting, which is the first step of identifying people. But there are the second base, third base, and home base that the latter part of recruiting is you can identify people, but if they're not interested in your opportunity, then you've got nothing. And your client is waiting for you, and you have a certain amount of time to fulfill that because the client is paying you for that time.
Yeah, I require the kids to use PowerPoint, and thank God ChatGPT doesn't have PowerPoint capabilities yet, but I think it's coming. My last question on franchise, and then we're going to move to more people of success, is what do you see as the future of the franchise industry sitting here in 2023?
Well, back in Jordan, you can appreciate this. Back in the school days, college, there was the old mindset of centralization and decentralization, and it's a pendulum. And business cycles go back and forth, and you can identify at what cycle generally where businesses are in. Are they centralizing? In other words, are there corporations controlling their outcomes, or are they decentralizing where they're relying on franchisees and entrepreneurs and using other people's money to grow the business? And we are very much still in that franchising world. And I would say since, again, 2014, 15, and 16, it is accelerated. I don't see that changing in the next 10 to 15 years or even 20 years. I really don't. And I say that because I can't think of any business moment that would cause the pendulum to switch back to centralization.
That makes a lot of sense. And so I'm going to now switch to the next part, which is more of being successful as an employee or perhaps as an employee in a franchise business, wherever that might be. I'm going to hand it off to William. Well, why don't you share one of the questions you posted?
Yes, sir. My name is William Timble. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, William.
So my question is from all your searches, what are some of the common character traits you have observed in exceptional executive level candidates?
Great question. There are three top attributes that I really look for in an individual. And the number one is intellectual curiosity. And why I say intellectual curiosity is because you can't teach that. That's something you can't fake. And intellectual curiosity is the ability to engage in such a way that you are learning more because you are asking not only intelligent questions, but questions that are engaging and personal to show the person that you're talking with that you want to know more, that you're hungry for knowledge. Now, I will say the smartest people do not always win. In fact, oftentimes the smartest people can alienate people because of other psychology purposes and things like that. But the old adage of being the smartest person in the room and the person that needs to be the smartest person in the room can turn people off. And to be a great leader, you've got to engage people, not alienate people. The second one is perseverance. In my world and in my profession, in my business and doing, the reason why I win is I either outwork or do things that other people aren't willing to do. And when I started selling copiers, which was probably the greatest and hardest thing to do because so many people fail, but it was great because it enabled me to learn how to engage people. Because way back when, and you guys probably, many of you don't know this, but everybody hated their copiers, they hated their salespeople, and they hated their service technicians. And so how do you go up against Xerox and Canon, who are the behemoths? And I worked for a company that was number 5. So, how, as the number 5th popular brand, how do you compete with it? You learn how to understand what it is that the company or individual is looking for and demonstrate why you're different. We used to have a performance guarantee, and at the time, I'm dating myself, but we had beepers. And so what I would say to people, especially office managers and decision makers at the time, is that you can call me anytime. Here's my beeper, here's my phone number, call me and I will be. And one of the things when I was at Lanier, we had to buy a van ourselves. Obviously that was part of a commitment and doing the job in the first place. But I used to have to carry 2 large copiers, which were the size of the desk that Jordan's in front of right now, to demonstrate the copier, as well as to possibly even provide as a loaner if the service tech wasn't able to get out there.
Emily? Next.
Perfect. Hi, my name is Emily Beckwith, and I was wondering, what are some common mistakes made by franchise candidates during the recruiting process?
Thank you, Emily. Good question, and pleased to meet you. I would say that the biggest mistake that franchisees make is that they think they know everything and that they're not going to fail. And the other part, and this goes back to the top 3 common reasons why franchisees fail. Number 1, and it's not necessarily number 1 per se, but it's the choice of real estate. The choice of real estate can make or break a franchisee's success, because if you choose the wrong real estate, even if you have great marketing and you may be able to make it up with great operations, you're going to be stuck for 10 to 15 and possibly even 20 years, no matter depending on how long you sign that lease for, with that real estate. And oftentimes franchisees make the mistake of, instead of going for not the best, you don't need to go, and it depends on the business and the concept. They don't always have to go for A real estate. They could go for B real estate, but oftentimes franchisees take the cheap way out and go for C and sometimes D, thinking that, hey, I got a good deal, I got my business open, and we're going to kick ass and take names because we're open now. Number 2, franchisees fail because they don't properly seed the market. And what that means is providing people the understanding that they're open, that they are providing a service, and that they are driving business to that franchise to let them know that they're open, available, and things of that nature. And that often is a lack of capitalization or proper capitalization, because it does take money to market. And then number three, and I'm not going to say this is always the case, but choosing the wrong people. And yes, your brother, family members may be trusted individuals, but they may not be the best and most knowledgeable for running the business. I mean, many franchisees, they may be wealthy, they have the money, but they don't have the business experience and the nuance of knowledge of that business, and ultimately fail the first 2 years. And you can go, most businesses fail over 80% in the first 2 years.
Makes a lot of sense. So now we're gonna go to the last section. I'm gonna let Robbie, I'm gonna let you kick it off.
Hey, my name is Robbie Crass, and I was just wondering if you were put in today's world, coming out of college, how would you start off your franchise journey, I guess, differently than how you did back in the day?
Okay, good question, Robbie. Pleased to meet you. One of the advantages that I think that many kids coming out is that you are comfortable with technology, and that you have a social network that is already established prior to getting out of school. But again, getting back to the old adage of it's who you know and how well you know them and how well you can get access to them. So I would always rely on family and friends. I didn't necessarily have that myself when I was your age getting out of school. I was lucky, but back then I sent out thousands of resumes to dear sir, dear to whom it may concern. It's the good news is that we are in a employment environment where employment is 3%, 4%, which is unheard of. So there are some opportunities there that are to your advantage, even though we are having what some call rolling recession in different industries. I would say one of the best things you can do for yourself to be authentic, because that's ultimately a big part of anything you do, is to be authentic, is figure out some franchising brands that you like personally and let them know that you want to work there because you believe in the vision, you believe in the message. There are 4 brands, but 3 brands that have done exceedingly well engaging the younger generation. Chipotle by default has marketed itself in spite of having E. coli problems in their supply chain. Many consumers, Gen X and Gen Z and millennial consumers love Chipotle because it's not what I would refer to as the institutional feeding system. The second one is Chick-fil-A. You go into a Chick-fil-A, there are more young kids, and it's amazing to, it's my pleasure. Even other restaurant companies are training people to say my pleasure. And then a third one is Culver's, which is out of the Midwest. And they've done a good job at engaging what I would say are the Christian-based people, to engage them to work there, family and friends. And it's a place where, and one of the few QSR places that people like to work at. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, sir.
And then Ben?
My question was, what's the best advice you could give someone looking to do what you do?
As a search person, the best advice I would give is, if you want to do this business, this profession, because it's, again, as I mentioned earlier, it's one of the few professions that you don't go to school to learn about. Because what's interesting about it is that it's a mix of both psychology, salesmanship, which I don't like to say salesmanship because people throw that as a negative, but really building of trust and personal engagement with people, but a belief in what goes around comes around. You know, you give love, you get love back generally.
Hey, David, you've been outstanding, just as advertised. Leave it with you with one last question. So you got a group of seniors in here. Give us any final words of advice that you would give to them as they're trying to find their way in the world today, to quote an old TV theme. Don't
Give up. As much, I would say perseverance, as I mentioned before, is what sets me apart from many, but be authentic, be engaging. Intellectual curiosity will win the day if you have the level of comfort within yourself to feel good about helping others. Those are all things that as you go through your career will benefit you. Those that are fake or conniving or backstabbing, you all know what I mean by that. So.
Well, hey, David, you've been awesome. I can't thank you enough for your time to give these students a great view of someone that they're going to be dealing with for the next 30 years of their workforce. And you dispelled many myths and also gave them some wonderful advice. So thank you so much. And I look forward to talking to you soon. Be well.
Hey, thank you, Jordan. Thank you, everybody. Good luck. Go KSU.
Right. For you.